S. Sahaj Vidhi www.sahajvidhi.in Question 1, 6. C. The law draws a distinction between coercion and undue influence. Coercion in the execution of a contract occurs when there is a physical compulsion of the person. In contrast, undue influence may exist without violence or threats of violence against the victim. In the light of this statement, distinguish between coercion and undue influence referring to relevant provisions and presumptions raised under the Indian Contract Act, 1872. Model answer. The statement accurately highlights the fundamental distinction between coercion and undue influence, both of which are factors that vitiate free consent in a contract, rendering it voidable at the option of the party whose consent was so caused. While both involve one party dominating the will of another to secure an agreement, differ significantly in the nature of the pressure applied, the relationship between the parties, and the legal presumptions involved. The Indian Contract Act, 1872, ICA, specifically sections 15 and 16, defines and distinguishes these concepts. 1. Coercion, Section 15 of the Indian Contract Act, 1872 definition. Section 15 defines coercion as the committing, or threatening to commit, any act forbidden by the Indian Penal Code, or the unlawful detaining, or threatening to detain, any property, to the prejudice of any person whatever, with the intention of causing any person to enter into an agreement. Nature of pressure, as the statement suggests, coercion involves physical compulsion or threats of physical force. It is an external, overt form of pressure. This includes threats to life, limb, or property, actual physical harm or detention, threats to commit acts forbidden by the IPC, e.g., assault, murder, criminal intimidation, unlawful detention or threat of detention of property. Relationship between parties. No specific pre-existing relationship of trust or dominance is required between the parties. Coercion can be exercised by any person, not necessarily a party to the contract, and against any person, not necessarily the contracting party. Burden of proof. The burden of proving that consent was obtained by coercion lies squarely on the party alleging it. Voidability. A contract entered into under coercion is voidable at the option of the party whose consent was so caused. Section 19. Example. A threatens to shoot B if B does not sell his house to A for a specified price. B sells the house under this threat. B's consent is caused by coercion. They. 2. Undue influence. Section 16 of the Indian Contract Act, 1872 definition. Section 16(1) states that a contract is said to be induced by undue influence, where the relations subsisting between the parties are such that one of the parties is in a position to dominate the will of the other and uses that position to obtain an unfair advantage over the other. Nature of pressure. In contrast to coercion, undue influence involves moral, mental, or psychological pressure. It is a subtle, internal form of manipulation that exploits a pre-existing relationship of trust or authority. It can exist without violence or threats of violence against the victim. As the statement notes, relationship between parties. A specific relationship is a prerequisite for undue influence. Section 16(2) identifies situations where a person is deemed to be in a position to dominate the will of another, where he holds a real or apparent authority over the other, e.g., master, servant, officer. Accused where he stands in a fiduciary relation to the other, e.g., parent, child, guardian, ward, doctor, patient, solicitor, client, spiritual advisor. Disciple where he makes a contract with a person whose mental capacity is temporarily or permanently affected by reason of age, illness, or mental or bodily distress. Presumptions, Section 16(3). This is a key distinguishing feature. If a person who is in a position to dominate the will of another enters into a contract with him, and the transaction appears unconscionable, i.e. unfair or unreasonable on the face of it, the law presumes that the contract was induced by undue influence. In such cases, the burden of proving that the contract was not induced by undue influence shifts to the party who was in a position to dominate the will of the other. This is a significant departure from the Jean-Rao, DLG 8 induced by undue influence is voidable at the option of the party whose consent was so caused. Section 19a. Example A. A spiritual guru persuades his devotee B, who is old and infirm, to gift all his property to A for spiritual salvation. The transaction appears unconscionable. Here, undue influence is presumed, and A would have to prove that B's consent was free. Distinctions summarized. Feature coercion, Section 15, undue influence, Section 16, nature of pressure, physical force, threats of physical harm, or unlawful detention of property. External. Moral, mental, or psychological pressure. Subtle, internal, plus violence/threats involves acts forbidden by IPC or unlawful detention of property. Can exist without violence or threats of violence. Relationship. No specific pre-existing relationship required, requires a pre-existing relationship of dominance or trust. Parties involved can be bile against any person, must be by a person. Police key. In a dominant position over the other party. Burden of proof on the party alleging coercion shifts to the dominant party if the transaction is unconscionable. IPC relevance directly linked to acts forbidden by the Indian Penal Code. No direct link to IPC, focuses on exploitation of relationship. Conclusion. While both coercion and undue influence undermine the free consent essential for a valid contract, operate through distinct mechanisms. Coercion is characterized by overt, often physical, threats or actions, whereas undue influence is a more insidious form of psychological manipulation arising from a position of power or trust. The ICA's provisions, particularly the presumptions under Section 16, reflect the law's recognition of the subtle ways in which one's will can be dominated, even without explicit violence. To ensure that contractual agreements are truly a product of free and informed consent, please visit our website www.sahajvidhi.in for more content.